This week on the Wake and Bake podcast.
I hope that through my being a proponent all these years of cannabis therapeutics, that people would take it seriously when I say there are risks, but they're easily identified and easily avoided.
So you can enjoy cannabis and not throw up all the time every day.
This is like one of those moments for weed nerds like us.
Today on the Wake and Bake podcast, we're going to talk about a subject that you may have never heard of before, Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome. Now, there are a lot of people in the cannabis industry who have a lot of ideas about Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome, and we expect to have a full inbox of people saying, yes, no, this isn't it, this is evil, this is terrible, this is amazing, and all sorts of opinions on this particular topic. We decided to sit down and talk to Dr. Ethan Russo about it because he's the person that we knew had done some actual research on it.
Yeah, I've been hearing for years and years that this syndrome, which makes you vomit if you consume too much THC, that this syndrome is caused by like a million different things. You know, it was neem oil, or maybe it was cannabis concentrates that we're using too much of. And Dr. Russo has done, like Corinne said, some actual research. And I imagine his reasoning for why this happens to some people and not others is going to be really mind-blowing for our audience.
Yeah, remember that Cannabis Hyperemesis Syndrome is a really new diagnosis. It's quite hard to be diagnosed with CHS. As far as we know, CHS is only impacting cannabis users who use often and high doses. We're not trying to scare anyone away from using cannabis, especially if you're using cannabis as medicine, although we do always advocate for tea breaks and using as low of a dose as effective for you. So keep that in mind as we go into this episode. We're not trying to scare you, but we do want you to be informed and up to date on CHS so you can enjoy cannabis. We didn't just call in Dr. Ethan Russo because he's one of the only people who's researching this right now, but also because he's one of the most prominent researchers in cannabis. He was the author of the first paper that I had ever read on cannabis about the endocannabinoid system. And I was just thrilled to be able to sit down and ask him these questions about something that we really just don't know a lot about right now. We're going to do something a little bit different on today's episode, and we're going to give this a number on the nerdy scale. So, Andrea, where does this episode land for you on the weed nerd scale from 1 to 10?
Yeah, this is pretty high up there. After all, we're talking to Dr. Russo, who, you know, he knows more about this plant and how it may work in our body than the vast majority of the world. So I'm going to go with a solid 8 on this one.
Yeah, I also agree. I think it's around a 7, 8. I think you should have a pretty solid understanding of what the endocannabinoid system is and how it works to dive into this episode fully. So if you don't know what the endocannabinoid system is or how it works, you can check out an episode in season 1 of the Wake and Bake podcast called Why Cannabis Works.
We are so excited and honored to have Dr. Ethan Russo on the Wake and Bake podcast today. I mean, you're one of the first researchers I came across when I started like trying to figure out what was up with cannabis. You know, it was one of the first papers that I read was by you. And this is like one of those moments for weed nerds like us. Dr. Russo, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, it's good to be here. I am Ethan Russo. I am a neurologist by training, but I've been involved pretty much full-time in cannabis and endocannabinoid research for the last 27 years. 11 of that was full-time with GW Pharmaceuticals, and I was involved in some 25 randomized controlled trials of Sativex and Epidiolex that now are marketed in some countries. Subsequently, I have worked in a couple of private companies, culminating 3 years ago with our own company, Credo Science, which is working towards making cannabis safer and better. That's our working ethos.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As cannabis educators, one of the things we're really passionate about at the Cannabis Institute is making sure people have a full picture of this plant. I'm sure that you have the same stance, but I always say that cannabis is the most dynamic plant medicine on the face of this planet. And it can be life-changing for so many people because it interacts with one of the most dynamic systems in our human body. But it's obviously not good for all people all the time. You know, this idea in cannabis culture, like, it's all good, bro, is clearly not true as soon as you start digging into the research. Now, especially over the past few years with new ways to consume cannabis and new, much more potent products on the market, it's more important than ever to let people know some of the downsides of cannabis use. So we're kind of having a bit of a bummer conversation with you today for some folks out there, because we've seen a lot of things happen in the past few years that are alarming to us as people who follow what's going on with this plant. One of the things that we've seen more of is the rise of cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. So, Dr. Russo, can you tell us what CHS is and how prevalent it is for cannabis users?
Sure, I'd be happy to. But I want to preface this by emphasizing what you've said. We will sometimes hear among activists that cannabis has no side effects, which is absolute nonsense. Everything has side effects when it's abused. You can kill yourself by drinking too much water. So I hope that through my being a proponent all these years of cannabis therapeutics, that people would take it seriously when I say there are risks, but they're easily identified and easily avoided. So with that in mind, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome was first recognized in 2004 in Australia, and they had 8 cases that fit a very stereotyped pattern. And the first one actually started in 1996. But what they had was people who used very high amounts chronically of cannabis, THC ultimately being the culprit. And they presented with a constellation of findings, including nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and something that's pretty much pathognomonic, meaning that you have this, that's it. And that was hot water bathing behavior. Now, these people didn't know each other, weren't talking to each other, but in each instance, they discovered that when they had these symptoms, if they took a hot bath or shower, often for hours at a time, that they could allay symptoms for a period of time. Now, that description in 2004 has withstood the ensuing 20 years. That is exactly what happens in this situation. But it is clear that a minority of people who use a lot of cannabis are affected this way. So what's different? Well, there've been all kinds of theories with no basis, including that it was related to pesticides or neem or these kinds of things. Well, again, I have been a tremendous critic of pesticide use in cannabis, but the symptoms of toxicity due to pesticides are flagrant and quite different to what happens in CHS. So we decided that we needed to figure out what is the pathogenesis, what makes someone susceptible to cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome where another person is not. And it certainly seemed likely that there could be a genetic susceptibility. So some years ago, we decided to test this and surveyed a bunch of heavy cannabis users who then were tested with DNA, genomic testing, to see if we could identify differences between them and people who used a lot of cannabis who weren't affected in this way. And that proved to be difficult. We had a lot of pushback from the CHS community about what we were doing and our motivation. But ultimately, we had 28 people with CHS who fit all the criteria, had a diagnosis, and had ongoing symptoms, who took the genetic testing. And we compared them to 12 people who were heavy cannabis users, in both groups averaging about 4 grams a day of cannabis, usually high potency. And we compared them. Now, our hypotheses were that there could be 3 different things going on. There could be a mutation on the CB1 receptor gene. So CB1 is where THC lodges, also are endogenous cannabinoids, the endocannabinoids. Second would be that maybe there's a problem with metabolism, breakdown of THC. And third was maybe this has something to do with the TRPV1 receptor. TRPV1 is a receptor that is triggered by capsaicin, the active ingredient in chili peppers. And it's also sensitive to heat. So we know that if capsaicin ointment is applied to the skin, that can allay symptoms of CHS temporarily, in the same way that hot water bathing. So those were the 3 hypotheses. Well, we turned out to have 2 out of 3 because we subsequently identified 5 mutations in the patients with CHS that were statistically significantly different to what was seen in the heavy cannabis users that did not have CHS. So it turned out that we did not see a mutation on the CB1 receptor gene, CNR1, but we did on the TRPV1 receptor, and we did on CYP2C9, which codes for an enzyme that breaks down THC. Then there were some surprises. There were 2 genes affecting dopamine metabolism. Dopamine is a stimulatory neurotransmitter. And what was interesting about this was there was a mutation in the CHS patients on the DRD2 receptor gene. That is a target of treatment in schizophrenia. When there's too much dopamine, it produces disturbances of the gut and nausea, and also produces addictive behavior that not only includes use of drugs, but also things like gambling and even sexual addiction. There was also a mutation on the gene that breaks down dopamine, COMT, catechol O-methyltransferase. So there was sort of a double whammy in many of the CHS patients affecting dopamine, and this seemed to fit very much with the phenomenology of CHS, meaning that it fit with the symptoms that they had, because these are people that had nausea, vomiting, counted for by the problems with dopamine, as well as the difficulty breaking down THC. But additionally, these people with CHS show a compulsive use of cannabis. Even though many of them have been very sick for a very long time, they almost invariably return to use of cannabis and get sick again. Unfortunately, and again, this is not casting aspersions on anyone, a lot of the people with CHS also had dependencies on other drugs, whether it be alcohol, nicotine, etc. And then the 5th gene was interesting and not something we had counted on at all. And that was a problem with a gene that has to do with cholesterol metabolism. And unfortunately, people that have this mutation may be at risk for additional problems, including development of Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, and coronary artery disease, heart attacks later in life. So we found these results very sobering, and I think that they'd be very important in public health discussions about this disorder. We also hope that these findings will lead us towards possibilities of treatment approaches. But right now, the advice we have to give to people with CHS is they really must avoid exposure to cannabis, THC in particular. There have been situations where people have tried CBD on its own unsuccessfully, but it's hard to piece that together because many CBD preparations also will contain at least trace amounts of THC. So that was a long-winded answer. I should probably stop and let you follow on.
That was perfect, actually. Can I just encapsulate it into a sentence to make sure that I understand what the paper proposes? That would be that if Corinne and I were both consuming high doses of THC on the daily, and she has one of these or multiple of these genetic anomalies, and I do not, that she may experience CHS, but I wouldn't, even if I continued to consume high THC over the years. I know there's many people who are nervous about like catching this syndrome, especially people who are relying on really high doses of THC. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think that's basically accurate. However, we don't know what the threshold is. Most people that develop CHS do so after long, hard use of cannabis. But once the threshold is breached, it seems like that's it, and you've got it, and you're susceptible from henceforth. I should also mention that anyone who has too much THC at a given time can get sick and vomit. Many of us have been there. When that happens, it doesn't mean that someone is at risk of CHS. It means that you had too much THC. So we should introduce another concept here, which is the biphasic dose response curve. So this will appeal to the nerdy ones out there. So what this means is many cannabinoids, THC included, do one thing at a low dose and actually the opposite thing at a very high dose. And this is very much true of THC. So at a low dose, everybody knows THC is good for nausea and vomiting, like in chemotherapy for cancer. But when you have too much THC, it produces the opposite reaction. People can get nauseated, vomit, and also drop their blood pressure. So the thing called orthostatic hypotension. This happens to some people when they use a vape for the first time. They inhale and suddenly hit the deck. They've fallen down in a faint because of a vagal reaction. This has slowed down their heart, not enough blood flow to the brain, and the solution is to be horizontal. Unfortunately, that involves a fall. You may crack your head, break something. So that can happen to anyone. But the distinction is in CHS that this is an ongoing problem with nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and again, this hot water bathing behavior.
I'm popping in the middle of this super nerdy conversation to say that if you are enjoying this, if you love learning about cannabis and how and why it works in the body and how to make it work for you so that you can feel better in your day-to-day life, and if you love talking about this plant with everyone you meet and trying to convince people to, give CBD a whirl when they're feeling rough, you are probably already a cannabis coach and educator. At the Cannabis Institute, we have been teaching people how to help others feel better with the power of cannabis since 2018. We'd love to have you join us. We need so many more people out there in the world who understand how dynamic, how multifaceted, how wonderful and potentially dangerous this plant can be, so that more people have access to it, more people understand it, and more people can feel better with cannabis. Please check out the links below to see what's going on in our class. Can't wait to see you there.
Can I drill down on something I found so interesting in this paper? And that is that one of these genetic markers also indicates that people who have it are going to have severe rigidity of thought. They're not going to be interested in changing their opinions on things. And that you found like this came up for you when you were trying to talk to people about CHS, that they weren't willing to change their ID, that definitely THC couldn't be the problem. Can you talk more about that?
I cannot say enough about how resistant even very intelligent people with CHS are to the idea that it's cannabis that's doing this. Ultimately, many just have a hard time believing it. And even if they espouse belief in it, they return to it at risk of their own health. It's tragic. We know people personally that have been affected, and in some instances, it's ruined their livelihood. Again, none of this is designed to be criticism. It's just reporting what we believe are the facts about this. Yeah, not the way anybody would want it.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's my understanding you mentioned a little bit about the pushback that you received when you were doing this study, which I think is pretty rare in research, right? You're not usually getting a lot of like public outcry for asking questions about a lot of these things. Can you tell me what some of the issues were and what that pushback was around? Was it specifically about this idea you just mentioned that it couldn't be cannabis?
Suffice it to say, there were certain individuals who felt that we weren't asking the right questions, that we weren't going about this properly. We were accused of profiteering, having motivation, you name it. If anybody cares, we've spent a fortune investigating this and haven't made a cent so far. If I did this to make money, it would have been stupid. I could have quit cannabis research and retired to the golf course 15 years ago. We did this because we saw a problem that had been an excuse by prohibitionists to keep cannabis illegal. And we wanted to elucidate the problem, identify what could be causing CHS, and seeing what we could do to treat it better. And that was the motivation.
All the participants in this study either vaped or smoked cannabis. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was some oral use, but for all intents and purposes, the people who had CHS were high volume cannabis smokers.
Okay. I want you to tell me that I'm safe. I love edibles. That is my preferred method of
Sure.
ingestion and sublinguals. Do you see this showing up in populations of people who are using cannabis edibles? I don't use higher doses, but I know a lot of people
Sure.
rely on that for medicine. So,
Well, it sure could. The more likely scenario for the person that's using an edible is that they exceed that THC threshold and that they could become nauseated or vomit because they've just had too much. Again, that doesn't mean that CHS will ensue. But again, there are thresholds to this whole thing. We should really emphasize at this point that when people are using cannabis therapeutically, generally speaking, the doses of THC that are required are very, very much lower than those that people would customarily use on an adult use basis or a so-called recreational basis. So on the one hand, therapeutic use of cannabis with THC involves using the lowest dose to allay symptoms, to treat the problem. Whereas in so-called recreational use, the idea is to have an altered state of consciousness. Now, I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing. However, too much of it can be a bad thing. And one of the risks in people who are susceptible genetically is to develop CHS.
At one point in the paper, you talked about that people with a certain condition might want to consider getting genetic testing before considering cannabis as a medicine. For me, that seems really far away. I'd had a genetic test for cannabis to see what my markers are and what's going on in there. But for me as a layperson, it was like really hard to parse. I had to go talk to someone who knew quite a bit more about this. How far away do you think we are from being able to take a test and having that actually determine our course of action while using cannabis as a medicine?
Okay, sure. First, let's put this in context. Let's suppose that you were a 14-year-old girl and your brother, who was older and a heavy cannabis user, developed CHS. You, the 14-year-old, were thinking of taking up cannabis. All your friends were doing it. She might consider doing the screening test for CHS to see if she had the mutations that seem to make someone susceptible. So that would be a context. Right now, there is a commercially available test that was developed from the technology that was in our publication. This is available through Indiana DNA or at the website what-is-chs.com. Additionally, Indiana DNA can give people feedback about whether they have other genes that might affect their cannabis usage. For example, people who are prone to anxiety may wish to use lower THC products and think more about products that contain higher amounts of cannabidiol and cannabigerol, because those are going to be helpful for anxiety. So that day is here now. It doesn't mean that there won't be great advancements in the future, but if someone is interested in looking at their genetic endowment and how that might affect their trajectory in using cannabis, that is available. And this is a now patented technology. This just isn't pie in the sky stuff. It was scientifically worthy of getting from the US Patent Office.
That's so awesome. I'm so excited. I do have a question, a follow-up to that, because we kind of been dancing around this idea about people who developing CHS having a dependence on cannabis, high THC cannabis. And so when we're talking about that and kind of not talking about cannabis use disorder and not talking about those other things, I think maybe it's a bit of a dance around it. And so I'm curious, with these tests, can you somewhat predict someone's prevalence for cannabis use disorder as well with this kind of testing?
Well, again, our study was accompanied by an extensive survey, and it was some 70+% of the people with CHS had been told that they qualified for cannabis use disorder or dependency. Among the heavy cannabis users who didn't have CHS, it was like 7%. Similarly, the people, heavy users without CHS, had not typically been told that they needed to stop cannabis usage for health reasons. So again, this is not a black and white situation. The genetic testing can indicate a susceptibility, but it's not a diagnostic test the way a pregnancy test would be. There, it's one or the other. You're pregnant or you're not. As Andrea had mentioned, when people get this kind of testing, they're often going to need or want additional explanation about what does it all mean. Believe me, this is a technology that's challenging for me as well. I had my genetics education like 50 years ago, no exaggeration. It is complicated stuff. And don't ask me the nitty-gritty of how the testing is done. I can say that it takes the DNA and breaks it into pieces and compares it with that of other people, using supercomputers. But yeah, beyond that, boy, it's foreign to me as well.
Thank you so much for talking to us about that. I feel like I have such a better idea of what cannabis hyperemesis syndrome might be and why it is that some people I know who are using really high doses never seem to get it. And then other people are walking themselves right into it. We like to ask our guests a couple of questions at the end of the show. So we're going to start out with, what are you really excited about coming up in the science field? Like, what lights you up? What do you want to talk about all day long?
Oh, I want to talk about all day long so-called minor cannabinoids. Put in context, the plant makes at least 150 different cannabinoids, and most people have heard of THC and CBD, but there's a world beyond. We're involved now in using a lot of the other substances, particularly cannabigerol, which I think is going to be a fantastic addition. It's proven to be extremely helpful as a non-sedating anti-anxiety agent. It seems to help with sleep, as a pain adjunct, so many things. We're doing a lot of formulation work using CBG and other cannabinoids along with terpenoids to create better, safer products for all these things that cannabis treats. And then there's a whole area beyond that, other cannabis substances like the Cannflavins, which are amazing anti-inflammatory substances. They're non-intoxicating. They seem to have application in treating many different disorders with inflammation at their basis, everything from arthritis to cancer, maybe even neurodegenerative diseases. It's an exciting field, and people shouldn't confine their interest to just THC and CBD at this point.
No, it's a whole wide world, right? This is incredible. I can't wait. I'm so excited to see what you publish next, but I get the last question, and this is my favorite question. What makes you so angry about the current state of the cannabis industry? Like, what do you just wish would go away, or people would stop saying or talking about? What do we need to leave behind, knowing what we know now?
We had one that cannabis has no side effects, so we dealt with that one. The thing that makes me angry is the people that make the rules know the least about cannabis. The legislators need to be relying on technical experts, whether it be scientists or physicians, to inform policy. And that never seems to happen. So
All right, everybody, you heard it from Dr. Ethan Russo. Send this podcast to your senators. Send it to somebody who needs to actually learn about cannabis. Share it with anybody who you think may be helped by this information, especially people who are suffering from cannabis use disorder or cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, to give some support and shed some light on this. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Ethan Russo. It's like literally a dream come true. So thank you so much.
Where can people find you?
Our website is credo, credo-science.com. I have a library of my articles that's available at ethanrusso.org. And then there's a library tab, and there's some 60 articles and book chapters there and these are available free for download because it's my personal website. And hopefully people could avail themselves of that resource.
I have to say that just on a personal level, I love to do research on science, but oftentimes finding the articles is the worst part. I know there's great information out there, but I don't have access to these huge databases or libraries. So when I was looking for some of your studies and came across your full library full of all your writings, I was so grateful for, again, what you're doing for the cannabis community and moving this forward. So thank you again so much for being here with us. We're delighted and really excited to share this with our audience.
Thank you.
Okay, CT, we just got to talk to Dr. Russo for an hour. And for me, I got to say, like, that was very relieving. We know that I use THC regularly for my depression, and I am always low key worried that I'm going to like catch cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And knowing that this is something that he feels is genetic, and I probably don't have it. So I feel better. How are you feeling after this?
I don't know. I don't know if I feel better about it. You feel better. I feel like it's still this kind of amorphous blob out there because yeah, it's genetic, but sometimes people use cannabis for years and years and then something changes. So what is that? Is it really burning out your system still, even if it's genetic? I think I still have a lot more questions about CHS, and I would really love to see this researched more in depth. I want to know more, really. But what I will say that I found very useful in this podcast is his take on CBG. As you know, I love CBG. I put it in everything, every formulation that I make now. I don't leave CBG out of the game. And so I really loved hearing that. But I do think that having this conversation made me even more conservative about how much THC we should be using. I'm like, it's still an unknown. Like, I think minimum effective dose is where it's at, because I would never want to not be able to use cannabis. I think that's like my thing is like, I don't want to be scared to use it, but I also don't want to get to a point where I can't.
Yeah.
That would suck.
Where it's unavailable. Yeah.
And it also makes me think about, yes, we know that it's only some people, but the more and more people that are using cannabis and the more and more people are introduced to these super high THC edibles and dabs and all these new ingestion methods where you can get a lot of THC, I'm curious as to how much this is going to keep growing. Because to me, I see like every time a marketplace opens up, every time there's a state that legalizes, that these are the products that become popular, 30% THC cannabis and dabs and all of these kinds of things. And if younger and younger people are using these higher THC things, and I think it just gives more of a chance for the people who are affected by this, even if it is genetically, to develop CHS. I'm concerned about the children, Andrea. I'm still concerned.
What about the children?
I don't want them to like get to a point where they're 50 or 60 or have a debilitating diagnosis that could be helped with cannabis. And because they had introduced high levels of THC and because they were more genetically susceptible, they can't use this medicine. And so I'm going to keep being the grandma of cannabis, TM, the early onset grandmotherhood, and say like, everybody just still chill out. We don't know enough. And THC is not the only thing in the world.
Yeah, I wasn't like skipping down the street with my dabs or anything like that. I still think being prudent with THC use is the right way to go. It just brought some light to what might be happening there. Whereas before it was kind of like a monster that I wasn't, I didn't really have a good handle on.
I'm not going to tell you to put down your joints, but if you do show up to like a meeting with a dab rig, I'm going to laugh and then shake my finger at you. But I will
still
laugh
never
first.
tried it. I've still never tried it.
Oh my goodness. Now I want to give you a dab. I tried it. I tried dabs. Have I told you about when I tried dabs?
No.
I don't know how people can do this, and maybe this is why I'm the grandma. The first time I tried dabs, it's like the first time I ever heard of dabs. Someone was making these like strain specific. It was like very heady at the time, and we had a trim camp in a basement. We were doing all of our trim stuff, and someone gave me this dab, and they're like, "This is going to be the most amazing thing for you ever." I remember them like selling it, like hyping it, like this is going to be so cool. You're going to love this. And I went to the couch. I took the dab, and then I went to the couch and I sat down. And then I was not here anymore. I was like, I thought I had died. I had like a full on like death encounter experience. And then when I came back, I was still not able to move from the couch for like what felt like infinity. And I was like, I really feel like it was good for me in some ways because I felt like I had to confront death and had a new understanding of time and how precious time in life is. So from that perspective, I'm like, maybe everyone should do a dab. But when I see people do dabs and then just like walk down the street, I'm like, how is that physically possible for you?
Yeah. What's going on over there? Yeah.
And please don't get CHS. I don't want you to have it. Like all joking aside, we know this is serious, and people who have CHS, it can be super debilitating, especially if they've been using cannabis as medicine. And we would really love to hear from you if you've been diagnosed with CHS. We'd love for you to share about what you've learned, what your experience was like, and how you received a CHS diagnosis. So please write into us at support@wakeandbake.co or comment wherever you are listening to or watching this podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
And this is your reminder that at the Cannabis Institute, we are now enrolling for our April 1st class of certified cannabis coaches and educators. If you want to feel highly confident when you talk about this plant, if you want to know that what you're telling other people is based in fact and science, if you want to get out there and help other people understand this plant and feel better by using this plant, you should join us. This is exactly what we do at the Cannabis Institute, is help people just like you take this knowledge and passion and turn it into a career. Check the links below to sign up. We'll see you on the inside.